During a hot afternoon in an isolated village in Mexico, Danny parked his car next to a dirt road where the simple houses contrasted with the stunning backdrop of mountains in the distance. He was coming back from a long trip in search of peace and quiet. The days spent in Houston had been chaotic and lonely, and the village seemed the perfect place to clear his mind. As he walked through the dirt streets, he passed a few small stores and heard curious whispers from the locals, who watched him from a distance. There weren't many tourists around, and the presence of a foreigner immediately drew attention. After a few minutes exploring the place, something caught Danny's eye. A small animal moving slowly in a narrow alleyway hidden among bins and garbage. As he got closer, he realized it was a kitten, completely dirty and apparently mistreated. The poor animal was weak, its fur matted and its breathing heavy, as if every movement was a struggle. Danny knelt down, holding out his hand, trying to calm the little animal with his soft voice. "Hey, little one, you look bad," he murmured, feeling a pang of compassion. The kitten didn't react with fear, but just watched with sad, exhausted eyes. Just then, an elderly woman, dressed in typical local clothes, appeared at the door of a nearby house. She looked at Danny and shouted something in Spanish, which he didn't fully understand. Soon, other people joined in, murmuring worriedly, their voices rising in warning. "No lo toques! No lo toques!" they repeated insistently, making emphatic gestures with their hands. Confused, Danny tried to understand what was going on. "Calm down, I just want to help. The poor animal is in terrible condition," he said, but the locals seemed even more distressed by his attempt to approach the kitten. A middle-aged man approached with a serious expression on his face. "You mustn't touch that," he said in heavily accented English, his voice deep and firm. "It's not a good sign. Bad things can happen." Danny shook his head, laughing nervously. "It's just a kitten. It's clear he needs help. I'll take him with me." The man frowned and warned him again. "You don't know what you're doing. We know what we saw before." Even so, Danny felt that it didn't make sense. He had always been an animal lover, believing that any creature deserved a chance, especially one so fragile and vulnerable. Against all advice and warnings, Danny made his decision. He carefully picked up the kitten, feeling the light, weak weight of its body against his arms. The villagers moved away, shaking their heads, some muttering low prayers. As he made his way back to his car, Danny could still hear the intense, worried whispers behind him, but he ignored them. He believed he was doing the right thing. Little did he know that this simple act of kindness would trigger a series of events that would completely change his life. As he placed the kitten in the passenger seat, he sighed, satisfied that he had decided to help. "You'll be fine now," he promised, starting the car and preparing to leave the village. As the car sped along the dirt road, Danny took one last look through the rearview mirror, seeing the inhabitants still huddled together, their faces expressing a mixture of pity and fear. But he preferred not to think about it. Little did Danny know that what he was carrying was much more than just an abandoned kitten. The winding, dusty road that led Danny back to the United States seemed endless, but he kept his eyes focused ahead. The little kitten was sleeping on the passenger seat, curled up in an old towel Danny had found in the trunk. The animal was still fragile, barely breathing properly, but at least it didn't seem so scared anymore. As he crossed the border, Danny felt a slight chill in his stomach, but the inspection went smoothly. He exchanged a few words with the agent, who glanced briefly at the car and waved him on. No questions about the sleeping feline next to it. The sun was beginning to set when Danny finally spotted the familiar lights of Houston, a relief after so many hours on the road. When he parked in front of his apartment, a mixture of tiredness and satisfaction washed over him. He was convinced that he had done the right thing. When he got home with the kitten, Danny placed it gently on the sofa and ran to get something to feed it. He opened a can of tuna and hesitated for a moment. Would it be safe to feed the animal that? He wasn't sure. but it was what he had on hand. As he placed the plate of food in front of the little feline, he saw it slowly raise its head, its hungry gaze fixed on the tuna. Slowly, he began to eat, and Danny smiled. "Yeah, have some. It'll do you good," he said affectionately, watching the animal devour the food with more energy than he had expected. As the hours passed, the kitten began to show signs of recovery. He walked around the room with slow steps, still a little hesitant, but it was an improvement. The fur, still dirty and matted, gave the animal a wild appearance, but Danny believed that with a few days of care, he would be healthy again. It was late when Danny sat on the sofa next to the animal, watching it fall asleep once again. A strange feeling came over him. Something in the creature's eyes, something in the way it moved, unsettled him. But he quickly pushed the thought away. "Maybe it's just tiredness," he muttered to himself. Before going to sleep, he decided that he would take the animal to the vet the next morning. He needed to make sure he was healthy, perhaps get some vaccinations or check for possible illnesses. The thought that he might have done something wrong by ignoring the warnings in the village still hung over his mind, but he tried not to think about it too much. However, as he turned off the lights and lay in bed, a subtle doubt took root. Why did the locals seem so terrified of that kitten? Part 3. The visit to the vet. The next morning, Danny woke up to the sun streaming into his living room. The kitten was still sleeping, curled up in the corner of the sofa, but its breathing seemed to be getting stronger. Satisfied with the animal's progress, Danny decided it was time to take him to the vet. He knew that the best way to make sure the little feline was okay was to go to a professional. After calling the local practice, he managed to get an appointment in the late morning. He took the kitten in his arms, feeling its body was still light and fragile, and put it in a makeshift box. On the way to the vet, the animal remained restless, scratching the sides of the box slightly, but Danny didn't think much of it. "He's just nervous," he muttered to himself, trying to stay calm. When he arrived at the office, the clinical atmosphere and the smell of disinfectant immediately calmed Danny down. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman with a professional smile greeted him. "Hello, I have an appointment for this little one here," said Danny, pointing to the box. "Of course, Dr. Vasquez will see you in a few minutes," replied the receptionist, checking his name on the list. Danny sat down in the waiting room, stroking the top of the box to try to calm the kitten, who was now emitting a low growling sound that didn't match the delicate behavior he had shown until then. Maybe he's hungry, he thought, trying to rationalize the change in his behavior. When he was finally called, Danny entered the examination room. Dr. Vasquez, a tall, calm man, wore his white lab coat with the assurance of someone who has seen it all. He opened the box carefully, and, the moment his eyes landed on the kitten, his expression immediately became more serious. Interesting," murmured the vet, looking closely at the animal as it struggled slightly on the examination table. "What do you think?" asked Danny, hoping for a more comforting answer. "He was pretty weak when I found him, but he seems to be recovering." The vet placed his hands firmly on the animal, trying to examine it more closely, but as soon as he did so, the kitten let out a deep growl and gulped for air near the doctor's fingers. Dr. Vasquez stepped back slightly, his eyes now completely alert. "He's very agitated. That's unusual for a cat in this condition," said the vet, stepping back a little. "I don't know if I can sedate him. He seems very weak. We'll have to do it gradually. First of all, let's try to strengthen him." He turned to a cupboard next door and took out a bag of special food, handing it to Danny. "Here you go. This should help him regain his strength. When he's a bit stronger, we'll come back for a full examination," explained Vasquez. Danny nodded, although he was a little uncomfortable with the kitten's reaction. Something about his behavior disturbed him, but he still believed that it could all be explained by the animal's weakness. Before leaving, Dr. Vasquez hesitated for a moment, his eyes fixed on the kitten, which was now growling softly, but not aggressively. "Just a recommendation," said the vet in a more serious tone. "Keep a close eye on him. If there are any strange changes in his behavior, let me know." Danny thanked him, still a little worried, and left the room with the box back in his arms. As he walked through the door, Dr. Vasquez watched him with an indecipherable look. As soon as the door closed, the vet picked up the phone and, with a tense expression, dialed a number. "Yes, I have something. Very strange. I think you should come and have a look." Unbeknownst to Danny, the vet was beginning to suspect that the little kitten was something much more dangerous and unexpected. Part Quattro. The Police Intervention. It was a quiet morning in Houston when Danny was awoken by an insistent sound, an urgent knock on the door. Half drowsy, he got up, trying to get his bearings as he heard the repetitive sound getting louder. "Police! Open the door!" The deep voice came through the wood, increasing the urgency in its tone. Confused, Danny hurried to open the door, imagining that it was all just a misunderstanding. As soon as he opened it, 2 policemen rushed in, without giving him time to ask why. "What's going on?" Danny asked, his heart racing with surprise. "Why are you here?" "We're after the monster," boomed the tallest policeman, a robust man with a stern expression. His eyes scanned the room as if they were looking for something terrible. "Monster?" Danny stammered, completely lost. "You must be mistaken. There's no monster here." The other policeman, a woman with a hard expression and her hair up in a ponytail, approached Danny with seriousness in her eyes. "Where's the animal you brought back from Mexico?" Her voice was firm, making it clear that there was no room for lies or excuses. Danny hesitated for a moment. "Animal? Are they talking about the kitten?" he thought, his mind racing to understand the situation. With a tightness in his stomach, he pointed to the corner of the room where the kitten was curled up on the sofa, apparently calm. "It's just a cat," he started to say, but was immediately interrupted. "That's not a cat," cut off the taller policeman, heading towards the sofa. He pulled out a kind of net and signaled to his colleague. "Stay alert. This kind of creature is unpredictable." Danny's confusion turned to panic. What were they implying? He took a step forward, trying to intervene, but was blocked by the policewoman who looked at him seriously. "Step back, sir. We're here to ensure your safety. You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, keeping her hand firmly on her belt, as if ready for anything. At that moment, as if sensing the tension in the air, the kitten suddenly stood up, his eyes gleaming menacingly. A low growl echoed through the room, startling Danny. The small animal he thought was sick now showed its sharp teeth, its claws tearing at the fabric of the sofa. It was no longer the fragile creature Danny had rescued. There was something much more savage and dangerous behind those eyes. Before Danny could process what was happening, the kitten leapt with frightening agility, knocking over a side table and throwing objects to the floor. The chase inside the house began. "Look out!" shouted the policewoman, pulling out her tranquilizer gun. The animal ran across the room, skidding on the wooden floor as it tried to escape, but the house didn't offer many escape options. The officers moved fast, knocking over chairs and dodging furniture. The animal was too fast, its growing fury turning the room into a battlefield. "Block the exit!" ordered the policeman loudly as he tried to surround the animal. Danny watched everything with his heart racing, hardly believing his eyes. How is this possible, he thought. The small, fragile kitten he thought he was saving now looked like a deadly predator, every movement fast and ferocious. Finally, after what seemed like long minutes of chaos, the animal was cornered. With impressive precision, the policeman used the net to capture it, while his colleague fired a tranquilizer dart. The animal growled, struggling violently, but gradually its movement slowed until it finally stopped. There was a heavy silence in the now destroyed room. The kitten was unconscious, curled up in the net, its teeth still exposed in an expression of fury. Danny approached slowly, stunned. This can't be real," he whispered, looking at the creature. It wasn't just a cat. Its body, now more visible, had much more savage features. The thick paws, the tense muscles, the robust structure. This was no cat. The policewoman turned to Danny, exuding an air of frustration mixed with relief. "Sir, what you've brought into your home is a young Mexican lynx, an endangered species, and very, very dangerous," she explained, while her colleague made sure the animal was properly contained. Danny was speechless, his mind spinning. A lynx? How could he have missed it? The warning from the locals in the village, the strange behavior. It all started to make sense now, but it was too late. Danny felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the warnings from the villagers. "Don't touch," they had said. Now he began to understand what they meant. He began, but the words failed him for a moment. Danny ran a hand over his face, trying to process the situation. "I was on a trip in Mexico, in a small village. I saw the animal. It was weak. It looked injured. People tried to warn me, but I thought they were just afraid or superstitious. I had no idea it was a lynx." The policeman, who had been silent until then, exchanged quick glances. The tallest of them, a man with rigid features, finally spoke. "We understand that you acted out of good intentions, but the situation is more serious than it seems. Bringing an endangered animal out of its natural habitat, especially without permission, is a serious crime, Danny." Danny felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. Crime? He could barely process the idea of being involved in something so big. "But I didn't know." His voice sounded like a whisper. "I just wanted to save him." "We believe that," said the other policeman, younger and with a softer expression. "And that's why, given that you're cooperating and considering the circumstances, we're not going to formally charge you. Your version of the story, coupled with the fact that you brought the animal to the vet, leads us to believe that there was no criminal intent." Danny almost collapsed with relief. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. He wouldn't be arrested. His heart was still beating fast, but now with a mixture of shock and gratitude. The veterinary assistant continued. "The lynx is now under proper care. He will be taken to a rescue center specializing in wild animals. The aim is to ensure that he recovers completely, and when he is ready, he will be returned to Mexico, to his natural habitat." Danny nodded, still trying to take it all in. The feeling of relief was overshadowed by a weight on his conscience. He had caused a great deal of trouble, even if he hadn't meant to. "I'm sorry about all this. I really didn't know," he repeated, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to come out. The veterinary assistant smiled slightly, showing understanding. "The good news is that the animal is safe now, and you did the right thing by bringing him to the vet, even though you didn't know what he really was. It shows that you care, Danny. Just be more careful in future." Danny nodded again, feeling the pressure on his shoulders gradually ease. The confusion in his mind was beginning to dissipate, but he knew that this story would be with him for a long time to come. The policeman stood up, preparing to leave. "We're going to need you to sign some documents confirming your statement," said the tallest policeman, pulling a sheet of paper from his clipboard. "And of course be aware that this was a warning. If something like this happens again, the consequences will be more severe." Danny took the pen with trembling hands, signing without saying a word. When he was finally alone in the room, he let out a long sigh. All he wanted to do was help, and he ended up getting involved in something he would never have imagined. As he stared at the sheet of paper in front of him, he reflected on the events. Perhaps next time he would think twice before ignoring the warnings of strangers. A week after the incident, Danny received a phone call from the Wildlife Rescue Center. The voice on the other end of the line was calm and friendly. "Mr. Danny, We just wanted to let you know that the Mexican lynx you brought in is recovering very well. Thanks to your action, we were able to provide him with the care he needs, and he will soon be reintegrated into his natural habitat in Mexico. Danny felt a wave of relief run through his body. The knot that had been in his chest since the day he discovered the true identity of the kitten began to slowly unravel.